Greetings. Today I'm coming to you with a film review of the limited series on Netflix, When They See Us, directed by Ava DuVernay. Those of you familiar with my other videos know that this is a departure. I usually talk about natural hair, but today I really wanted to talk about this film. I recently watched it. It actually debuted a number of months ago, May 31st, I believe, but I didn't watch it in its entirety until last week. And I wanted to share this film because one of the reasons why it took me so long to watch the film was um, many people said it was really emotionally draining, really difficult to watch, and I just needed to give myself time. And so this is kind of an encouragement for those of you who have yet to watch the film because of those reasons and why I think it's helpful and important to watch the film and a way that you can go about watching the film that'll help you digest the material in a way that's healthy and not too overwhelming. So without any further ado, I want to get right into the review of the film. So I have some notes here, so I'll be glancing here from time to time. First, I want to give you all a brief background of the story for those of you not familiar with um, what um, what it's based on. So in 1989, five young men were arrested by the New York City Police Department and prosecuted by the District Attorney's Office led by Linda Fairstein for the brutal rape and assault of Trisha Miley, a young woman in New York City in Central Park. These young men were not at the scene of the crime. They didn't participate in the crime. They didn't commit any part related to the crime. And yet they were forced to make these false confessions at the ages of 14, 15, and 16, were subsequently, convicted of crimes for which they did not commit and spent between 6 to 14 years in prison. They were only exonerated of those crimes when the real perpetrator of the crime, Mateus Reyes, confessed to the assault. Okay, so that's the story. Now, in terms of the film, I want to start with the acting. Acting can make or break a film, and the acting in this film is superb. I believe a number of people so far have been nominated for an Emmy. One of the individuals who plays um, one of the teens at the time, the man Corey Wise, is nominated for an Emmy. Niecy Nash, who plays Corey Wise's mother, and I think there may be some others as well. The acting is superb. You will believe from the very beginning that these are kids. And that's important because we see the exonerated men and we think of these men have been, compensated by the city of New York for this injustice. But it takes us back into the reality that these were 14, 15-year-olds. They were thinking about sports and music and, high school and going to parties and having fun. And in 24 hours, within, a matter of a week, they were arrested and then now being, funneled through the criminal justice system. Um, the outline of this film, I think, is helpful for those of us who might have a difficult time watching such heavy material. It's a four-part series, so you can watch an episode and then take a break. And actually, that's what I did. Um, I'm a criminal justice professor, as you can see in the title, but this subject matter hits close to home. I was raised in New York City, not in Manhattan, but in another borough, and so the feeling of the film, there was a familiarity. The buildings and the concrete, this urban setting wasn't something that was foreign to me. These are places where I've been, and an environment in which felt very familiar. Um, it takes place in 1989. I was a child then, but I very much remember the early 90s and that feeling, the music, and there's a lot of similarity there. So there is a lot of um, overlap. And so watching one part and giving myself a break because of how personal it hit home was important to me. And so I'd encourage those of you who haven't or thinking about it, tell yourself, you know, I'm going to watch part one this week. And that's it. And that's what I did. I watched part one, took maybe 3 days to watch part two. Part two for me actually was the most difficult. I won't lie, I skipped through some things. It's the scene basically focuses on the courtroom trial process, and I knew that I was so angry from the interrogation process in part one that I needed to give myself a break because you know what happens, right? This is a real trial. This is a real case, um, and then and then I give myself a few days, and then I watched parts three and four in the same day, in part because I knew that we were going to be seeing them as adults, and then ultimately the conclusion, and I was looking forward to the resolution of that. Although I will say that part four is not an easy part. Is not an easy part to watch at all. So I would recommend that for those of you to break it down in those parts. And I think that was helpful for such heavy subject matter. The music, I want to touch on the music. Music and whether it's a soundtrack or the score can really make or break a film. I won't say break a film, but it definitely adds to the film quality. You can think of films like Star Wars and The Lion King and Jurassic Park, right? John Williams is one of the, one of the most well-known um, writers of music for those films. Think of The Color Purple and Quincy Jones, right? And the list goes on and on. So the score and soundtrack are really important, and they really paid attention to that detail in this film. A lot of the music is um, contemporary. There isn't as much of a score. It's much more lyrics, or much more soundtrack based, but they match the mood. Very beginning, late 80s, hip hop, hopeful, that matches the mood, and then it transitions, right? As the um, film's content changes. And lastly, the message. Um, this is not a Wikipedia version of the events that took place in 1989. This is not a Wikipedia version of the Central Park Five. We see what happens in the case, we see what happens with the miscarriage of justice, but we see what happens for these men when they return home. They have to register as sex offenders as soon as they leave prison. They have a difficult time, as you can imagine, gaining employment because they're sex offenders. What are the consequences of not being able to gain employment? Especially when you know in your heart you didn't commit this crime. We see the horrors of prison, particularly for the only one of the five who went straight to adult prison, Corey Wise, because he was 16 at the time. How that changes a person when you're in prison, being abused, going to solitary confinement. Um, this is an injustice that really will never be fully made right by the city of New York. And how do we, as the public, make sure this doesn't happen again? How do we fight for those who are currently being incarcerated for crimes for which they have not committed? And I think that is the underlying message. You don't watch this film, get to the end of part four, and think, whoa, that was heavy, but I'm glad they're exonerated. You get to the end of this film and you think, this cannot happen again. You get to the end of this film, and when you see a high profile case of this magnitude, you don't take for granted that the media is telling you or portraying the criminals correctly. Sometimes it's clear cut, right? There's video footage, multiple eyewitnesses accounts. None of those things happen in this case. There was no DNA, blood sample corroboration. There's so many holes, and yet this miscarriage of justice took place. And so it definitely pushes you to interrogate contemporary cases that are taking place. I'm a criminal justice professor, and I kind of want to touch on that a little bit. Um, I, as you can see, am a Black woman. Um, I do believe there is an important role for criminal officers of the criminal justice system. I don't think the criminal justice system needs to be abolished, but I do think there is a great deal of change that needs to take place because not all police officers have the best interests of the citizenry at heart. To believe that is naive. There are some police officers who are what we call in criminal justice bad apples. That's a term that you may have heard. And there are many who do want to uphold the law, but there are many more who are in this in between category. And you see glimpses of that in the film, who see that something is going on wrong, but say nothing. If you are on the side of the oppressor, you have chosen them, right? You're complicit. And how do we make sure that those who are silent are, I don't want to say incentivized because there should be a moral compass, but know that they also have a part to play in the mistreatment of innocent individuals throughout this country. So there's so much more I can say about this film. I'm sure there's so much more that others have already said about the review of this film, but that is my takeaway. The acting is superb. The portrayal of the criminal justice system when it is broken and it doesn't work is really accurate. You might watch this and think this is ridiculous. This would never happen, but it did happen, right? And I think it gives you pause to interrogate yourself, your assumptions, and lastly, what do you see when you see young African American Hispanic males running around, laughing, playing loud music on a Friday, Saturday night? Do you see criminals, potential criminals? Will you see the same thing if those were white boys doing the same exact thing? Boys will be boys. Or do you see something different, troublemakers because of the complexion of their skin? And you want to think about those things and interrogate those things within yourself um, so that hopefully you can be a part of positive change. All right. So that is my review of When They See Us by Ava DuVernay, or directed by Ava DuVernay. And again, it's on Netflix. I encourage you to watch it um, and share your own thoughts on the film. Take care and peace.